This is something that I wrote about in my book, this sort of framework of rigidity and chaos and the way in which we as humans lean one way or another when we're under stress. So I hear from your description that when lawyers are under kind of work or legal stress, they lead towards rigidity. What's the one exception to the rule that makes the whole house of cards crumble? And there's this sense of like deep, deep diligence and go line by line by line by line, be systematic. And then on the other side of that, we have this capacity to descend into chaos when we are under stress. And for lots of us, that looks like impulsivity, no capacity to organize and structure life. And so we have to be, I think, as humans, kind of cautious of living on either end of that spectrum, and be able to navigate that spectrum in a well-rounded, thoughtful way.
Are you a firm owner with feelings of burnout? Are you an attorney with work-life boundary issues? It's so common and easy for us attorneys to let our mental health take a backseat to our work and our businesses. Dr. Sherry Walling helps smart people do hard things. She is a clinical psychologist, speaker, podcaster, angel investor, entrepreneur, yoga teacher, and mental health advocate. Her company, ZenFounder, provides mental health-related resources to leaders and entrepreneurs as they navigate transition, loss, conflict, or any manner of complex human experience. Sherry joins us to help navigate the mental pitfalls of legal entrepreneurship and practice. We discuss the subtle exhaustion, stress, and burnout that founder owners experience, and the choices we make about boundaries and workload management. There are ways to deal with the mental health pain points of running your own firm and reset your approach in a healthy way, and Sherry delivers a lot of insight. These are incredibly important topics that affect every interaction of your business and certainly affect your client service. All that said, this conversation isn't a 30-minute slog. We keep it light, and hopefully you connect with a lot of what we cover. I think you will. I'm John Strohmeyer, and this is the 5-Star Counsel Podcast. The market for legal services is shifting, and lawyers who don't adapt will be left behind. This podcast gives you a competitive edge in today's market by sharing the client service lessons you probably didn't learn in law school or in law practice. Let's start the show. Hey 5-Star listeners, before we start, I want to tell you about our amazing sponsor, Smith AI. Smith AI is a virtual receptionist service for small businesses with a specialty in working with solo and small law firms. I signed up with them within weeks of starting my firm because they are affordable for even the smallest solo practice. Their friendly receptionists respond to potential clients in Spanish or English, screen and schedule new leads, and can even take payments. And now they're answering calls 24 hours a day. So even when you're asleep, they're still working. Even beyond the phone, they've got live agents and chatbots ready to capture leads on your website, by text, and by Facebook Messenger. Smith's friendly gatekeepers can staff your front line so you can work uninterrupted. You can finally have the peace of mind that while you're working, you're not missing out on future work. Plans start at just $70 a month for calls and $100 a month for chats. Smith AI is offering a free trial, and our podcast listeners get an extra $100 discount code with promo code 5STAR. That's FIVESTAR. Sign up and learn more at www.smith.ai. Don't let another day go by. Try Smith AI. Hey, Sherry, it is so exciting to have you here today.
I am really happy to have this conversation with you.
Oh, thank you. We met a few years ago, and even before the headaches and kind of nightmare psychological scenarios imposed by the last year were dropped on all of us. One of the things that I've just learned and really been adapting to as the owner of my own firm for the last few years, or almost 3 years, is how different and how stressful this can be. And
right, there's a different mental game that you're playing, right, when you're in charge.
Right. One of my mentors told me years ago, I was switching jobs. He knew I wasn't ready to go out on my own yet, but he had told me that I would end up one day calling him to have a conversation about trading the headaches of working for somebody else for the headaches of working for myself.
Yeah.
And it's been true. Ultimately, I have been able to, appreciate and enjoy the headaches. They are still much better. And even yesterday, I was having a call with a colleague. It's like, well, whenever you want to come work for us, we've got a spot for you. And I could just hear in the background, yeah, when you want to come put on a suit again and not work at home and do all the things that we need you to do as part of this bigger firm. And no, that wasn't going to help me.
I feel like we should have more clarity when we're making our big life and vocational decisions that essentially we're choosing which pain we want. Like, of course, yeah, we're choosing the benefit, but like, it's like, what headache do you want? Which pain do you want? Do you want a big dry cleaning bill and have to have butts in seats according to someone else's schedule? Do you want to be answering to others? Or do you want to answer to yourself in a completely unstructured and really without many feedback loops kind of challenge? I think that both being an entrepreneur as an attorney and then, of course, working in a larger firm or a different setting where you're working for somebody else, they carry with them benefits, but they also carry each a unique set of pain points. So which pain point do you choose?
And oh, that's such a great way of putting it, because most people who go to law school just do it. I mean, as oh, I got out of college. What am I going to do now? Panic. I don't need a real job, or I got a job, or I've got a degree that won't help me. I'm just going to head to law school and kick the decision down. Oh, I've seen shows, lawyers seem to do well, and I hear they make great paychecks. And then they get a few years in and they realize, well, you're not going to court. It's not as exciting as you maybe thought. You may not like what you're doing. You may not see a good way out. And then we get trapped where you just don't like a lot of people just don't like what they're doing. They get stuck in a practice area they don't. And there isn't a way for them to realize what's going on. And so it brings back to the mental health aspect that, surprise, that's what you're here for. How can we, good or bad, whether or not you like what you're doing, at least realizing what you were talking about with those unconscious trade-offs. Mm-hmm. What have you selected? How can you at least, I guess, acknowledge what those trade-offs were and make the best of it?
Yeah, I have deep empathy because I feel like this scenario that you're describing is one of the shadow sides of being an ambitious, successful person, is that you go through your educational experience and you follow the rules, you do all the assignments, you turn them in on time, like you climb the ladder. And law school, what a great pinnacle of that. You go to law school, you get your degree, you have these incredible opportunities. And if you decide to go out on your own, suddenly that game stops. There's no one who is reviewing your work, really. There's no teacher that you're impressing. There's no set of tasks that you have to complete in order to get to the next level. Like you're at the next level, you've arrived, but yet you find yourself in this la land of very little structure, very little feedback, very little clear path forward about how to be successful. And I think that's actually quite shocking for those of us who are, successful in an academic trajectory and then go on to become entrepreneurs, because it's sort of this void of emptiness and loneliness. And what should I be doing? Is anybody out there? It's me. God, are you listening?
Yeah, I mean, and for most lawyers, none of them have any experience running any businesses. I mean, I was lucky enough to work for the Four Seasons before I went to law school, so I at least saw what a normal, healthy business looked like. And I kind of had some ideas about that. But then I went to work in law firms, and the first few years, it's like, okay, well, this is how this works. I guess this is what lawyers do. And it took a while to kind of break free and realize, no, this is what lawyers do, but it doesn't mean it's the only way we can operate, because mostly what you get is a lot of, I won't speak for all the places I've been, but a lot of friends, a lot of listeners will be familiar with just the toxic environments of overwork and abuse and a lot of punching down that exists in law firms, because highly motivated people who don't know how to behave sometimes can create these really bad environments.
And one of the gifts of combining law practice with entrepreneurship is you do get to rewrite some of those rules. It can be less stability, it can be less certainty, it's less of this feedback loop of success that many of us are used to and comfortable with. But wow, you get this amazing opportunity to create the world with your purple crayon the way that you want it to be to some extent. And I think that's what draws many of us into these alternatives where we're in charge. We want to set the parameters. We want to create the culture. We want to make the decisions.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that at the firm I left to open my own, I had figured out, there's this great program called Calendly where people can just find time on my calendar and I don't have to go back and forth. So I set it up. I tried to work with IT, but the bosses I was working for were so, I'll use the word that we'll come to in a bit, so rigid in how they were thinking that because it didn't fit in how they thought the calendar should work, they were used to email back and forth or have your assistant do it. They couldn't imagine how technology could work in such a way. And well, somebody may not be able to one time get on your calendar, or there might be a mistake. Therefore, we can't ever let that happen.
Yeah.
And, I ended up engineering a workaround with a Google Calendar so that it would work into my Outlook calendar. But it was so fixed and nobody saw a new way out.
And I think it's really important to keep those things in account when we're talking about the mental health struggles of going out on your own, or the mental health struggles of doing your own deal, because that's obviously my work, is to help talk with entrepreneurs about the things that are hard. But I want to do that without ever losing sight of the things that are great, of the freedom, the ability for innovation, the ability to tailor it the way that you want. So we're always making trade-offs. And there are certainly some things that can get really draining and exhausting and really mentally wearing about doing your own thing. But man, that always comes right alongside all of these advantages.
Right. We've got to pick and choose. And you really, like you said, you get to create what it looks like. I'm lucky enough to figure out, I don't want to take calls too late. I don't want to take calls too early. I'm okay with working Sunday afternoons. Mm-hmm. And clients have responded well to that. Like by Sunday afternoons, I usually have one client meeting for the ones who are lucky enough to pick that up. But it's also setting my own boundaries. It's Sunday afternoon. It's not Saturday afternoon.
Yeah. I was going to say, from some of our previous conversation, it sounds like you've done a really good job of thinking through boundaries. And that is one of these really great mental health strategies that I think really serves people in any vocation, but especially those who are running their own business, is some clarity around when my mind is marinating in work questions and when my mind is doing other things. And the space between work and play, or work and home, or work and whatever else you do is really important, not only because it makes you like a happy, well-rounded person, but because it's essential for neurological health. If we keep kind of running the same sort of neuronal tracks, they become like a hamster wheel in our mind. And we don't diversify the parts of our brain that we're using. And that sort of neurological diversity is essential for solving problems in novel ways. It's essential for growth, for learning, for creativity. And so when we don't have those other things, when we don't have a yoga practice or go hiking with our girlfriend, or like have these other things in our life that matter, we risk really exhausting our brain in significant ways that over the long run can be pretty damaging.
I'll try and put that back together. Like, we've got to have some diversity, but also setting the boundaries so that, work time is work time, playtime exists. And you can't be, the 4,000 a year grinder.
Right. And for many of us, the problem is that if we don't have boundaries, the default setting is work all the time. I think especially when we're running our own business, and especially when we've been hard workers for most of our life, the default setting is like, Saturday morning, I'm getting up and I'm doing email. And Sunday midday, I'm also making client calls and doing all. So the boundary exists to protect the two segments, or the many segments of our life, from work bleeding over into everything.
Right. One of the rules I instituted for myself a couple years ago, because I could, was no email Saturdays. And it's not, I'm going to pick some no email Saturdays. I've picked every Saturday.
Yeah.
Barring a few exceptions where if I know something's happening, I'm going to be paying attention for clients. But generally, my clients aren't showing up on a Saturday expecting anything.
Sure.
I don't have this short time emergency, so everybody's going to have their own. But even if you did have the emergency clients who might show up, it would be, like doctors have with on-call on the weekends. Somebody's responsible for checking that. Not everybody's on 24/7.
Yeah. And I love that as a discipline, to have no email Saturdays, for lots of reasons. But, one of the things that has been really helpful in my life as a person who's married and a person who is raising 3 children is we have screen-free Sundays. And so on Sundays, it's hard, but we don't do iPad. Sometimes we'll watch a movie together as a family, but it's very intentional technology use. And it makes us play board games. It makes us play outside. It makes us do art. We make a lot of sweets in the kitchen and eat too much sugar, but other problems. But it forces this novelty and creativity to not just default to more email time.
Right. And I mean, if nothing else, well, there are plenty of things that are great about that. But what I really like is it's forcing you to think about doing other things. And it also keeps you from pretending you can multitask with your phone in your hand while playing the board game, while doing pretending to be with somebody who is in your family and instead having half your brain tied around email.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the great fallacies that we have experienced as modern people is this expectation of multitasking. And again, most of us with, quick brains who have sort of well-honed intellectual skills, we tend to believe in our capacity for multitasking probably more ambitiously than is real. That
Right.
most of us can't really do two meaningful things at once, and we can't really be present with people when we're also really attending to that buzzing phone.
Right. I think about it every morning when I'm making coffee and breakfast at the same time. That's a thing I can multitask on because it's pretty much rote at this point. I can hold my hand on the bean grinder while I'm pouring pouring out something with the other hand. But that's about the limit. And if I get one of them wrong or off, we'll be okay. But I mean, I think
The
it gets
stakes
too
are low.
Yeah. I mean, it's exactly, the stakes are low, but we think we've got to be trying to grind out so much productivity at once when really, instead of trying to do 85 things at once, if we did one thing at a time, it might end up being a lot easier.
And I can tell you from a mental health perspective, it's a lot better. What we don't realize is how, over the long term, that subtle exhaustion does deplete sort of our resources in our brain. So when we are expecting our brain to perform in ways that it's not really intended to do, there's a wear and tear that accumulates that results in things like unmanaged anxiety or over time burnout, other really significant mental health consequences that aren't good for us as humans and certainly aren't good for our business. And multitasking is one of those sort of slow, silent killers of our well-being and wholeness that many of us are, kind of lapse about.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, it comes down to you have to take care of yourself across many different vectors, setting those boundaries and not making the choice that the business is the most important thing 24/7.
Yeah.
And so I'd mentioned rigidity, but it's the kind of the chaos. It's almost like people want to thrive in chaos as the opposite of it. The lawyers love being, well, we're going to be rigid. The rules are this is how things work. But then we operate in almost complete chaos with zero boundaries, zero space away. And it's almost like the multitasking version of that continuum where you're just jumping back and forth between complete chaos and nothing happens and total rigidity where you have no control and you need somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing this up. This is something that I wrote about in my book, this sort of framework of rigidity and chaos and the way in which we as humans kind of lean one way or another when we're under stress. So I hear from your description that when lawyers are under kind of work or legal stress, they lead towards rigidity. What's the one exception to the rule that makes the whole house of cards crumble? And there's this sense of like deep, deep diligence and go line by line by line by line, be systematic. And then on the other side of that, we have this capacity to descend into chaos when we are under stress. And for lots of us, that looks like impulsivity. It looks like, for me, it's like I can't find my keys. I lose my keys every day. It's like I have no capacity to organize and structure life. And so we have to be, I think, as humans, kind of cautious of living on either end of that spectrum. That rigidity is not a relational, joyful, healthy way to live, either neurologically or just on that human side. And then chaos has its own problems, right? That's the recipe for bad decisions, for overindulgence, for impulsivity, for, other kinds of destruction. So finding the way to move back and forth between, okay, in this part of my work, I'm very structured and careful and thoughtful. But then I also have places in my life where I can lean a little bit more into being a little bit more flexible and loose and creative and, spontaneous, and be able to navigate that spectrum in a well-rounded, thoughtful way.
Right. I mean, I kind of think about it as rigidity ends up looking like Amazon, which is great. You go, you press the button, and the machines and the humans get you things very, very quickly. But if something goes wrong, good luck finding a human who can help you with the problem, because they've set it up that the system is right, will get you what you want, but there's just near zero slack in the system.
Yeah. And I think, and to even bring it into my domain as a psychologist too, rigidity looks like obsessive compulsive disorder on its edges, right? It's, I cannot leave this room until I blink the light switch 17 times and make sure that I've, done these behaviors that help alleviate my anxiety so I can move on. And then at the other end of the spectrum, that chaos spectrum, that's mania. I mean, true edges of bipolar disorder where people are absolutely elated, but absolutely operating without any kind of thought of consequences or structure. Or, I mean, people at that end of the spectrum usually end up in the hospital.
Right. And I mean, it's just finding the happy medium of, you're going to be paying attention, you're going to have the rules, set up your boundaries so that when you're there, you're focused. But it's, again, just, you've got to give yourself the space to be mentally healthy around all of this. We can't just force ourselves to be one way all the time.
Yeah. And the boundaries exist to create space to play, right? So it's like with your kids, when you say, all right, here's your boundary of where you can ride your bike, or even more specifically, like, here's the fence of our yard. Hey, run free in the yard, climb the trees, throw the ball, play with the dog, like, be in this space. But here are the parameters. And when you go outside of these parameters, you're at risk, you're in danger. So some of those boundaries that we set up in our lives function in the same way. Stop work at 6 p.m. Turn off your computer on Saturdays. These boundaries exist not to be harsh or, overly rigid, but they exist to create space for play and for creativity and for fun.
Right. So we can get the time to recharge and heal, so that we can come back and, you can work much harder if you don't work 24/7.
Right.
So one of the other things you got into in your book, and we will make sure to have a link to it, is just setting healthy goals of, making sure you've got the adequate benchmarks. And I am doing a bad job summarizing it right now, but it wasn't what you hear a lot of people say is, oh, well, we're just going to jump into SMART goals. You actually, you broke it down into like the macro piece, and then figuring out the steps along the way to make sure you got there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, SMART goals are great, especially within the context of a business. But when I think about life goals, when I think about the big picture of what I want my life to look like and feel like, I do want to ask those bigger picture things. So maybe a goal is something like, I want to grow my friendships. It's a big picture, not necessarily deeply, objectifiable goal, but it's this general sense of like, oh, I want my life to feel richer in relationships. And so how do I get there? I probably have to take some risks. I have to sign up for some things. I got to talk to some people. I have to invite people over for dinner. Like, there's specific actions that fall in line, but the actions serve a larger intention or a bigger picture goal that is both vocational, but also a larger sense of how I want my life to feel and where I want to go directionally.
Interesting. Yeah, because if we start treating the non-work life as though we start trying to bring in the metrics we use in business and measure, oh, I need 85% more friends or 37.5% more interactions, it then feels like, you're gamifying your own life way too much. And again, you've got to turn that off. And it's just like, how many times can I get likes on Instagram or whatever it is, when that's not going to help you?
Right. That's the ultimate gamification of relationships, right? That's the SMART goal. It's easily objectifiably measurable is how many likes on Instagram. But does it answer or speak to that larger desire of, I want to feel more connected to others? Probably not. So that's
Right.
why we have to be, I think, more nuanced in our metrics, especially as we're thinking about the deeper parts of our life.
Interesting. Have you seen anybody try and gamify the play part of their life too much? Like, what's the pitfall with that? Or is it just, it's that simple?
I think that a number of the entrepreneurs that I work with, and I'll put myself in this category in some ways, when you try to gamify play, you're always upping the ante. So it becomes riskier, or it becomes more expensive, or it becomes, you know, I think there's a way to level up play too much, to the point that, okay, you've gone skydiving 57 times so far this year. What is the end game there? You're becoming sort of an adrenaline junkie, rather than making sure that that play really serves you as a human.
Right. So figuring out what you can still get out of it. I mean, would that require for the consistent skydiver, does that mean maybe giving it up or backing off?
Yeah. Or again, what are you after? How is it serving you? What's the psychological goal of risking your life that many times? That's
Interesting.
what I would be curious about.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, having only skydived once, or skydove, that was fine. I got what I needed to out of it, so I'm not going to be able to run down that line anymore. So, I mean, as we start to wrap things up, I'm looking at, here we're talking to lawyers who love finding the one exception that allows them to say no or get out of making a change. I mean, that's a huge pitfall. Is there some, like an exercise or something we can do to start recognizing that, so that, as a takeaway, they've got something to say, oh, wait a minute, I'm applying my legal thinking to things that don't need to be legal?
Yeah, I think that the hard thing about adulting really well, to be honest, is really developing a deep capacity of self-reflection. And it's recognizing the urge, I want to say no, and letting that piece of data be interesting enough for exploration. You don't need the legal loophole if you just want to say no, want to say, I don't wish to stay at this job. I don't wish to stay in this relationship. I don't wish to take this client. I don't wish to read this book. Like, recognizing the inner inkling towards, no, I don't want to, and honoring that, giving it some space to percolate, some time for you to recognize the desire and think, oh, I wonder what my apprehension is here. Maybe I should give that some attention.
Right. So if somehow your body is telling you something, maybe just listen to it.
Right. And that, of course, it's easier said than done, because we're big brains. Like, we're big, really developed brains, you lawyers and psychologists like me. Like, we've overdeveloped in some ways our intellectual capacity, and underdeveloped our intuition, underdeveloped our wisdom, underdeveloped our social and emotional skills. And so we're just going to grow those other parts of us. That's okay.
Sherry, I think this is probably as good a place as any. We could probably keep talking for hours, but ultimately, yeah, that mental health, you've got to develop the skills that aren't just the ones you use in work.
And it's not forceful, right? Again, I remember what it felt like to stay up late and cram and make myself learn whatever information I was learning, whatever fact it was. But that game is up. We don't have to do it that way anymore. And the things that we're drawn to aren't out of force, they're out of longing.
What a great point. Sherry, where can people find out more about you and what you're doing?
Yeah, I live on the internet in sort of two places. My personal site is sherrywalling.com. And there you'll find information about how I work with entrepreneurs and founders. And then I also have a podcast called ZenFounder. And that is, of course, free and available. It's your weekly mental health tips for entrepreneurs and owners. And there also will contain information about my book and other things that I might be dabbling in at any given moment.
Sherry, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening. You can find more info on us and get your free white paper on client service at 5starcounsel.com. You can get in touch with me at john@5starcounsel.com. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe wherever fine podcasts are found and leave us a review wherever you can.